Welcome, Megalithomaniacs. Welcome to the Megalithomania podcast. This is the second one. Today, we're speaking with Andrew Collins, who's a well-known ancient mysteries author. He's published numerous books at the cutting edge of these ancient mysteries. The most recent is co-authored with Greg Little called Denisovan Origins. And we're going to be getting into some interesting subjects today. The first thing we're going to be looking at is this new Dragon Man skull, which has been discovered in China, which could be linked with the Denisovans. We're also going to look at this announcement that was made in Turkey about 11 ancient sites that are contemporary with Göbekli Tepe found in that general area. And we're also going to get into a few other subjects relating to this. And also, we're going to be doing the Origins Conference, which I want to announce that. That's going to be the 7th and 8th of November. It's going to be online. We can't do it physically, unfortunately, but we're going to be doing it online, and we'll have more information about that over the next few weeks with some absolutely brilliant speakers lined up for that. So, hello, Andrew. How are you doing?
Hi, Hugh. Yes, I'm good.
So one of the things, you put out a couple of really cool videos about this so-called Dragon Man skull that was found in China. It was found a while back, like 85 years ago or something, but there's something about it. I mean, it's been promoted as this new type of human being, but the thing is, it's big. It's really big, much bigger than kind of what is expected. And, you know, tell us about what you think about it, just to get started.
Well, I mean, I think probably the best thing to do is to say how it was discovered. I mean, it was actually in 1933 in the northern province of Heilongjiang, which we'll come back to, but that actually means Black Dragon River. And it was in the city of Harbin. And there is a river that flows through there called the Sungoya. And the Japanese had invaded China, and they were forcing the local people into making a bridge over the river. And one of the guys, you know, involved in this labour, came across the skull and realised that if he showed it to, you know, the Japanese, they would take it away. So he hid it inside a well. And for whatever reason, it remained there until 2018, when on his deathbed, this guy tells his grandson. The grandson, you know, goes to the well, finds it, and presents it to the local university, or a university, which is a place called Hebei. And of course, you know, they sort of start jumping up and down and want to know more about it. Unfortunately, by the time they got back to, you know, the original finder, he died. So the exact location has been lost, unfortunately. But a lot can be, you know, determined from the actual skull itself and from, you know, what we know of its characteristics, appearance, size, all the rest of it. But to start off with, it's of huge size. I mean, roughly, I'm going to do this in inches. It's about 9 inches by 6 inches. And it's incredibly dolichocephalic. In other words, it's a very long-headed skull, basically. I mean, you know, if you found it in any other place in the world, somebody would probably say it's artificially deformed, but it's not. It's natural. The other thing is that it has features in it that are both of modern human, in other words, Homo sapiens. So the whole shape of the face is incredibly modern looking, but it also has what they call robust or archaic features as well. And they include these huge brow ridges, basically. And as I said, the swept back head that's almost egg-like in appearance. And what else have we got? It's very wide as well, a very large opening for the nose and for the mouth. And the Chinese that started studying it, they've not done any DNA work on it at the moment, which, to be honest, is unfortunate. But what they did was they did this Bayesian study which essentially is like a sort of prediction analysis thing, based on a whole number of other skulls of what this was. In other words, to try and determine whether it was something that we've already seen before, human, Neanderthal, Homo erectus, or whether it was something new. Well, they came to the conclusion that this was a totally unknown species that never been discovered anywhere in the world before. So they named it Homo longi, which basically just means, dragon man, essentially. And I mean, firstly, most Western paleoanthropologists have rejected this already. I mean, not as politely as they possibly can, but I mean, people like Chris Stringer at the Natural History Museum, John Hawkes, who's another paleoanthropologist. I mean, they're all kindly saying this is an incredible find, but suggesting that it is actually a new species just simply from one skull is probably a little bit premature. And all of them have essentially said this is a Denisovan. And of course, that's exciting because we already know about the Denisovans, and we also know that the chances are they were of extreme size. And this is something that I've said since I first wrote about this in 2014 in the book Path of Souls, which was authored by Greg Little, but I did contributions for that. And that basically was the first book, or the first writing anywhere, that said Denisovans could be the giants of legend. And, I gave the evidence at the time, which was essentially based on the fact that the teeth that were being found in the Denisovan cave, where the Denisovans were first discovered or first realised they existed, were of huge size. And some of the archaeologists, geneticists involved with the study of those teeth and the finger bone that was also found in the cave, which revealed the DNA of the Denisovan for the first time, they were all hinting at the fact that the Denisovans were going to be of big size. And this has been repeated on several occasions since then, particularly when they found a couple of pieces of a parietal bone from a skull in the Denisovan cave a couple of years ago. And again, they basically said, these guys are going to be very big. I mean, they were using terms like built like an American football player, basically. So, somebody that's of huge size. And personally, I've sort of seen them as like compared with a WWE wrestler, like the Great Khali, who's 7'2" in height and built like a brick, what. And, to me, that is how I think the Denisovans looked. And of course, what's happened is that the discovery of this skull, which is essentially the largest skull that's ever been examined by anthropologists. I mean, Chris Stringer, for instance, says that, it's the largest skull he's ever seen. And in his words, and I've seen a few. So, for him to say that, I think that's quite extraordinary. Of course, we both know from our own research that many of the skulls that were found in the United States, coming from mound cemeteries, Native American mound cemeteries, almost certainly were much larger. But the problem, of course, with all of those is that those skeletons, those remains have gone. They were either destroyed, given back to Native American tribes as part of NAPRA, the repatriation of Native American remains. So, those have lost. But so this is the largest skull that we've got that's actually being studied by science right now. And everybody's saying it's a Denisovan, and that's the key to all of this.
So what sort of size is it? I mean, it's obviously it's difficult. There are some measurements. I mean, but what is it in comparison, say, to a standard size?
It's bigger than ours.
Like this big? This big? Is it huge?
No. I mean, as I said, it's 9 inches by 6 inches, which if you sort of look at it and measure that out, it doesn't seem very large, but it is larger than ours. And you know, as I said, if the anthropologists say it's the largest skull that they've ever studied, then who are we to say it? And the other interesting fact is that the closest comparison to the teeth and the shape of the actual upper palate, the upper jaw, has been compared with the jawbone that was discovered in the Bashiai Cave on the Tibetan plateau back in 1980 by a monk who just happened to be in there doing his pilgrimages. And he finds this jawbone, hands it to the local, lama of the local, monastery, who then hands it to a local university. And this has been determined to be Denisovan. Plus, as we both know, there was a very large jawbone discovered off of Taiwan in the channel between the islands of Penghu and Taiwan back in, certainly before about 2008, I think. That's when it first surfaced. That's huge. And that greatly resembles the jawbone that was found on the Tibetan plateau. And that is also almost certainly that of a Denisovan. So all the evidence is beginning to tell us very, very clearly that this is correct, that the Denisovans were of immense size. Now, we can't say exactly how tall they were, but I think that, common sense now begins to suggest that there's a link with giant remains that have been found, obviously not just in the United States, hundreds and hundreds of different examples, but of course worldwide. And it may well be, therefore, that the Dragon Man, Homo longi, is a Denisovan. Denisovans are the giants of legend.
So let's just sort of summarize this a little bit. So firstly, you've got the Dragon Man skull. He's around. That's been dated to 146,000 years ago.
146.
You also got the Penghu jaw, which is found off the coast of Taiwan. They say that's 200,000 years ago.
They don't know. Unfortunately, they can't date it, but it could be anything from 15,000 to 200,000 years older. But I think that the smart money is on it being at least 60,000, possibly 100, possibly 200,000 years old. But the date doesn't really matter. The fact is that its teeth, its shape, closely resembles Denisovan remains. So the chances are it is an example of a Denisovan.
And you mentioned in your report and your video, you mentioned that there's these Dragon King kind of myths. So this guy's been called the Dragon Man skull, but is it because of the myths, or is it is there actually, are the myths being remembered, and this is actually a memory of who this Dragon Man was going back 146,000 years? I mean, can myths really last that long? And can you tell us a little bit about that, because that really intrigued me, that you've got this dragon kind of king story linked with these giants.
Well, start off with, of course, there are sort of giant legends all the way around the world, and they are definitely found in areas where Denisovan remains have been found so far, like the Tibetan plateau. There are stories of the giants and the ogres that form their own dynasties in Tibet prior to the arrival of modern humans. So that's there. In Siberia, you've got lots of stories about giants who created everything from the first irrigation, the first bridges, the first musical instruments, to being the first ancestor of the modern humans in the region. So we've got that where the Denisova cave is. And obviously here in China, where I think you're going to end up finding an awful lot of Denisovan remains eventually, because it's part of this sort of eastern migration, I think, where they would have ended up in the eastern side of the Eurasian continent. And that's where you're going to get most of them, because I think they originally started their journey by coming out of Africa, passing through the Levant in particular, and then gradually carrying on into Central Asia, and then obviously into Northern, Eastern, Southern, and Southeastern Asia as well. But anyway, so what I'm trying to get at is that there's a good chance that there are myths and legends that remember these oversized individuals of the past. And very clearly, they get exaggerated, both in their height, but also in their appearance. And coming back to the Dragon Man skull, is that firstly, I think it's actually very fortuitous that it's called the Dragon Man, because that's triggering off so much in people's heads, everything from alien draconians to reptilians, all the rest of it on the wild side of things. But from the mythological point of view, what's interesting is that the Dragon Man skull takes its name from this big river in the region, which is the Heilung, Geong. Geong is river, Lung obviously is dragon, He generally means black, so it's the Black Dragon River. In Russian, it's known as the Amur River, but as I said, in Mandarin, it's Heilung, Geong. And this has its own legend, how it got its name. And the story is that, long ago, this woman gave birth to a child, and when the child came out, it did not look like a human, that it actually was a dragon that was black in color. And the husband didn't like what he saw, tried to kill this dragon, and it got out through a window. And as it went out, the husband chopped off its tail. So already we've got a dragon without a tail. And apparently it went to the river, and it had a battle with a white dragon that just happens to turn up. And the black dragon wins, and that's the reason why the river is called that name. That's the story. If you look online, that there's actually a video of an elderly Mancunian person. That's the Mancunian culture, is that which is in this northern province, and explaining this whole story, which is fascinating to actually hear it, from an elderly local inhabitant of the region. But here's the thing: if you look online for Black Dragon Heilung, you'll find that one of its descriptions is, as it says, the chimp dragon. Now, the word chimp obviously is short for chimpanzees, and I take this to be a slight mistranslation of ape-like or primate-like, which is what is suggested. And it said that it actually had thumbs like humans that sort of folded across the fingers, opposable, I think they're called, opposable thumbs like modern humans have. And you think, what? This is a dragon. And I think that what's being described here in incredibly abstract form is the memory of the presence in this region in the past of archaic humans. And those archaic humans, if they are connected with this dragon skull, are almost certainly Denisovans. So in other words, this is another example of this folk memory of the presence of archaic humans in a particular region. And of course, these dragons are big. They're not small, they're huge. And so, that's what I think. But what the other interesting thing is that the Black Dragon itself forms part of a group called the Dragon Kings. And you'll find quite a lot about those in Chinese mythology. And if you look at them, they're bipeds with heads which are human-like but have dragon features. They look very much like the so-called Rakshasas of Indian, Hindu, Buddhic folklore that are found obviously from the Indian subcontinent right the way across into island Southeast Asia. And they were said to be of incredible size. Obviously, the Rakshasas were also considered to be demons. But you look at them and they're giants. There's no question about that at all. And they form part of that very ancient mythology, which probably comes from Vedic sources, most of it, and probably once again relates to very archaic inhabitants of the regions where these myths began in the first place.
One of the things that people may not realize, if they're not too clued up about the Denisovans, is the fact that they're not just giants. They're not, potentially they're giants there, but they were very advanced. And one of the things you've written about and we've discussed before is the fact that they were producing, some extremely extremely sophisticated jewelry, needles, bone needles, and other objects going back, 100 or more thousand years. And I think a lot of people don't realize that about the Denisovans. So just, I think, if people are listening, they don't know who these people are. They were a highly sophisticated culture where there shouldn't have been this kind of technology, especially this far back. So can you describe maybe a couple of the implements, a couple of the jewelry and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it seems as if there was a great amount of sophistication and basic technology amongst the Denisovans, particularly those in Siberia, and therefore we have to assume the spread of wherever they went, you're going to find similar sort of technologies. In other words, China, Tibet, probably Mongolia. Those are the obvious places where I think you're going to find, probably in the Russian Far East as well. But the best example of high technology from them is the so-called Denisovan bracelet, which anybody viewing this now, just can look up, or you can flash a picture up of it. I mean, it's an example of perfection as far as jewelry and the artisan trade is, because I mean, it's made of something called chloritolite, which gives it its green color, and it's perfectly carved bangle, and it's beautifully polished, and it has a hole in it which was done by a drill with such a fast feed rate that is comparable with a modern day drill. And I mean, this is not some alternative pseudoscience statement from somebody like me. This actually comes from the main archaeologist involved with the investigations, the excavations at the Denisovan Cave, which is where this was found. Who is Anatoly Derevienko? That's it. Who is almost like a sort of rock star archaeologist, in Russia. Really, I mean, done so much for us to understand places like the Denisovan Cave, and that's one. But also, the oldest bone needles in the world were manufactured in the Denisovan Cave, and very clearly they would have been used to create tailored clothing. So we have to assume that they had tailored clothing as well. They also possibly rode horses, and again, this was a news story that came out of the discovery of equine bones and DNA inside the Denisovan Cave. Now, whether this, whether they did domesticate and ride horses, I don't know. I mean, but it certainly have been speculated. So, you've got people riding around on horses, perhaps, with tailored clothing, with beautiful jewelry. Plus, it seems as if they had a knowledge of the movement of the sun and the moon. A beautiful figurine of what appears to be a cave lion was discovered in the so-called Denisovan layer at the cave. So that dates from about 40,000 to about 70,000 years ago, this particular layer. And it's got a series of markings on, 72 in all, and they're in groups of 4. And the way that you can interpret this is very clearly indicative of the cycles of the sun and the moon and eclipse cycles. And this is very, very interesting, because this seems to be the start of something that emerges very quickly in the same region of Siberia, until you get the Malta plates, right? Which is this, if I remember rightly, I think it's mammoth ivory. It's got all these spirals pecked on this plate, this bone plate. There's 7 spirals in all, and there are hundreds of these peck marks on it, but they're all in sequences that seem to suggest a knowledge, not just of the movement of the sun and the moon, but eclipse cycles over a very long period of time. I mean, I talk all about this in 2 books, the Cygnus Key and also Denisovan Origins. And I think that this is the evolving knowledge of the Denisovans that's been handed to us when we first encounter them, probably around 45,000 years ago in Siberia and Mongolia. And what happens is that we mate with them, the last of them, and the hybrid descendants of this introgression, as they call it, take the knowledge, the legacy of the Denisovan technology onto the next stage, and carry it not just to other parts of Siberia, China, or whatever, but also westwards into places like Southwest Asia, and it gradually moves as waves of activity until eventually, I think, it ends up at places like Anatolia, where flowers, of course, Göbekli Tepe around 9,600 BC at the very end of the Younger Dryas period. Now, that's a big leap, I know, but I try and explain, in my books, the paper trail, if you like, that takes us from Siberia all the way into Southwest Asia and westwards into Europe, because it's quite clear that the pulses and ripples of the Denisovan legacy, was moving out in every different direction, north, south, east, and west, although not very north, because it was obviously very cold still in the north, but certainly the other directions. And that, to me, this is the point of origin of a lot of the rudiments of civilization, is Siberia, Mongolia, that area. And there's archaeological evidence to back this up, not just with the technologies that we've been talking about, but stone tools, stone tool industries. I mean, a lot of the tools that end up in the Upper Paleolithic toolkit begin in the area of the Denisovan Cave. It's almost like the Denisovans invented these, handed them to their human hybrids, if you like, after the mating, and we carried these ideas with us and did not lose that technology. It ends up, as I said, at places like Göbekli Tepe eventually, and then from Göbekli Tepe going south through the Levant back into Africa, where it will probably all began in the first place, and obviously from that comes the Pyramid Age, quite literally.
So with with this idea of like technology, this super ancient technology, you've been looking at that also in another area in Israel, at Kesem Cave, and we have the Denisovans creating these remarkable bracelets, these needles, and possibly the origins really of this technology. But I was looking at something you produced, sort of written about, was these spheres, these like geometric type spheres. Could you maybe like just give an outline of where the research there, what led you to that area, and what you discovered there, because you actually went to Israel to look at this?
Yeah, I mean, we have all the Denisovan research, but then my attention started focusing in on what is modern day Israel, because of the discovery of a swan bone in somewhere called the Kesem Cave. And this is just outside of Tel Aviv. And the archaeologists involved with these excavations had concluded that this swan bone had not only evidence that the feathers, which, by the way, it was from a wing bone, and the very wing bone that gives flight to the bird, that the feathers had obviously been removed for a specific purpose, and they were thinking that it's not just ceremonial, but possibly shamanic in nature and animistic, but also that the bone itself may well have been used and utilized, for some function. Now, in other words, they believed that there was a chance that shamanism had gone on here, but the big thing is that this bone is 300 to 30,000 years old, and that the people that were in the Kesem Cave date from about 400 to 200,000 years ago, and they were incredibly sophisticated. I mean, for instance, their stone tool technology was off the scale. They they invented a number of things relating to the use of fire to prepare tools for the first time ever. They had sustained fire at the same spot for possibly 100,000 years, you know, this fire pit. They created the first canned food, not literally canned food, but they would chop the legs off of deer, and they would immediately bind them in such a way as that it would preserve the valuable marrow, bone marrow inside them for anything up to several months. So you could then bind them up, chuck them in your backpack or whatever they had, and they'd have food wherever you went. You could go out and about. And a lot of things like this were all coming up to do with these Kesem people. And I'm thinking these people are very, very important. And the fact that they may well have also invented shamanism, if you want to look at it that way, said there's something going on here. Now, who were these Kesem Cave people? Well, they found a number of teeth inside the cave. And an examination of those showed that they were almost identical to modern human teeth. And so, of course, this was suggesting that maybe the oldest proto-Homo sapiens began in the Levant, not in Africa. Now, clearly, that's a controversial topic in its own right. But this seems to be a possibility that as early as 400,000 years ago, you've got proto-Homo sapiens, very advanced, creating shamanism in the Levant, the corridor, obviously, between Africa and Asia. So there's all this. And, I wrote about this initially, and then I realized something else. And this was something that was mentioned by one of the excavators in a paper to do with the Kesem Cave. They said that there may have been a possibility of a connection with the Denisovans, because they would have been passing through this area, so to speak, around 400,000 years ago, and that they couldn't rule out the possibility there was a link. There was not a link between the Denisovans and the Kesem Cave people. Well, that just set my mind racing, because I was thinking, well, hold on, is it a possibility that the Kesem Cave people, as proto-Homo sapiens, encountered the Denisovans, they got together, as always seems to happen, and they produced offspring, hybrids, that then continued the journey and ended up becoming the Siberian Denisovans. And one of the reasons why they were so sophisticated is because they were already hybrids. They weren't just Denisovans, they had Homo sapien DNA in them as well. Now, we wouldn't have noticed this when the genome of the Denisovan was done, because we'd have just purely seen it in terms of something new. In other words, we couldn't compare it with that of the Kesem Cave people, because there was no DNA for them from this early date. So, in other words, we'd have had no knowledge that the genome of the Denisovan may also contain some elements of proto-Homo sapiens as well. And of course, all this is now blowing up big time, because the other big discovery that's come out in the past couple of weeks is the finding of a human-like skull, or fragments of it, at a place called Nesha Ramla, which is, again, not far away from Tel Aviv, not far away from the Kesem Cave. It dates to about 130, 140,000 years ago. And this was a big open-air site, very advanced toolkit. And this skull has, just like the Dragon Man, features that are both modern human and extremely archaic as well. And the excavators, or the paleoanthropologists that have been studying these fossil remains, have basically looked at the Nesha-Ramla skull, looked at the Dragon Man skull, said, this is the same thing. And that's very interesting because the Nesha Ramla people are the descendants of the Kesem Cave people. And I'll tell you for why. Because the teeth in the Nesha Ramla skull match those found in the Kesem Cave. In fact, the same woman that, not scientist, that studied the Kesem Cave teeth is the same one involved with looking at the Nesha Ramla skull. So, you know, what I said back in 2019 and wrote about it, and I did an article for Ancient Origins, plus talked about it, I think, at the Origins conference, now looks as if that's correct. So I'm going to, you know, really stick my neck out and say that the Siberian Denisovans are hybrids in their own right. And that's one, and that, you know, that's a hybrid of Denisovans that came out of Africa originally and proto Homo sapiens. They are hybrids in their own right. And I think that's one of the reasons why they end up becoming so intelligent, because for some reason, their mindset, their mind is, you know, is ripe for invention, just like the Kesem Cave people was. And why exactly that is, that's another mystery. We've got to unravel that one.
So what you're saying here, though, just one thing. What you're saying here is that the Kesem Cave is like the discoveries are older than the oldest known Denisovans. Is that correct?
Well, yes. I mean, but I think that what we can say is that the Denisovans, as far as, you know, their range of being around is the same as that of the Kesem Cave, from about 400,000 down. Well, the Denisovans were with us until about 40, 50,000 years ago. The Kesem Cave people were 400 to 200. So there's an overlap, you know, and I think, as I said, there's a direct relationship between the Kesem Cave people and the Denisovans and this Nesha Ramla culture as well. They're all interrelated. And the thing about migrations is that they're never one way. They're always two way. You know, if somebody starts at A and goes to B, somebody always wants to come back to A. And, you know, in other words, there's this interrelationship between all of these different types of archaic humans, and that this is part of a missing picture that's now beginning to emerge about how this spread of humanity and technology actually came about.
Yeah, and we didn't mention too much about them spheres, them geometric.
Oh, right, okay,
spheres.
yeah. Right,
because,
well, yeah, that's the other thing. Is, and again, I go into this in great detail in the new book which is coming out, called Origins of the Gods, which is co-written with Greg Little again, is that they would also appear to have been using either perfectly spherical balls of limestone, or some of them were multifaceted and actually look like primitive Swarovski crystals. And I go into great detail about this because the archaeologists involved are happy to accept that these have some kind of symbolic function. They may have had a material function as well. In other words, they could have been used to bash things, to break open bones or whatever, but that was not their primary purpose, and that they may well have been used in these very early shamanic rituals. And I have, you know, I got the artist Russell Hussein to do a painting of the first shaman, basically in the Kesem Cave, which is going in the book. I put that on the video, and yeah, that shows the use of these balls, basically, these spheres, and I mean, you know, exactly how would they use them, we're not sure, but I do write extensively about this, and I find it very strange that, and it has to be a coincidence, that Kesem, the word Kesem, means magic, basically occult or divination. And although in theory that's a coincidence, what was going on in that cave almost was some of the earliest primitive magic and the earliest shamanism anywhere in the world. the Kesem Cave is an incredibly important place. And I think that the more we know about that culture and obviously their descendants, which are the Nesha Ramla people nearby, the more we're going to understand the absolute origins of human technology.
So if we jump forward quite a long way in time, there's a new report that's come out through the Turkish press claiming that 11 sites have been found, 11 sort of hilltop sites have been found in the area around Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. Now, you've done a huge amount of research, books. We've visited there several times together, and they haven't actually mentioned what these other 11 important sites are, but they're kind of hinting that many of them, or possibly all of them, are new sites, although I don't believe that. I think many of these have been excavated, they've been reported. We know about sites in the area which date to the era, with Göbekli Tepe, it's 12,500 years old or thereabouts. But there's other sites that we know about, like Navali Chori, which is 10,500 years old. It's Karahan Tepe, which there's claims coming out that that's older than Göbekli Tepe, but I'm not so sure about that. But what do you make of this report? It's a very vague report. It's just come out. I'll put a link below in the section below, and people can make of it what they will. But what do you make of that generally?
Well, I mean, first, before I answer as to what I think is going on, it's important to remember that the Turkish Ministry of Tourism is involved. They're obviously trying to promote Göbekli Tepe as, the oldest site in the world. The word temple is contentious. And they obviously want people to come over and see the site. Eventually when everything opens up. But I think that they're overstepping the mark with certain things. I mean, the Karahan Tepe announcement about it being older than Göbekli Tepe, I think, is pure propaganda. We've been there on various occasions, as we know, and I can tell you now that the style of the monuments there, the type of stone tools, all generally date from about 8,500 to about 7,000 BC, and then basically just stop. There's nothing later. There is a few examples of stone tools that have been found there that are earlier, and these have been reported by Behin Chelak, who was the archaeologist that did some cursory work on there. On Karahan Tepe originally, including some at least one lower Paleolithic hand axe, which would probably go back, 100, 200,000 years at a minimum. But I don't think that these tools have anything to do with activity going on at the site. They were probably heirlooms that were brought to the site for possibly as offerings being made to some kind of great ancestors, something like that. I mean, that's exactly what was going on in the past. Even at the Kesem Cave, the Kesem Cave people were picking up much older hand axes and bringing them to the cave for some reason. So this is something that's been going on since the beginning. And I don't see any evidence that Karahan Tepe is older than Göbekli Tepe. And I think that there's a certain amount of national pride going on here, because obviously, as we know, it was the Germans that discovered Göbekli Tepe, Klaus Schmidt. And I think that the excavations at the Karahan Tepe, because they are being exclusively done by a Turkish team, they want to see it as like the motherlode of activity and announcements and discoveries in that region. So I would treat these claims very cautiously unless good evidence is presented. And the thing is that even if a number of the other sites that found in the area, they've said, they go back 12,000 years, 10,000 BC. And that's correct. That's absolutely correct. But the actual stones don't go back. The T-shaped pillars and things like that, they have a very fixed window of production from around 9,600 to about 8,000 BC, possibly just slightly later. They don't seem to have been manufactured earlier than that time. Now, I'm not saying that we won't find evidence that they haven't, but certainly the sites so far and the dating of them gives us a very neat idea, very, comfortable idea of when they were manufactured. But quite clearly, a number of these sites could be older, with settlements going back to 10,000 BC. At Göbekli Tepe itself, nothing has come out so far older than 9,600 BC. And it's possible you won't get anything any older. I think to look for older ones, you've got to look either further north or possibly in the area around places like Mount Nimrod, Nemrut Dar, which is about 45, 50 miles to the northwest of Göbekli Tepe and can actually be seen on the horizon on a good day. That area there has a lot of late Paleolithic remains, and that's where you should be looking, I think, for the ancestors of Göbekli Tepe. But anyway, as to this new discovery announcement, I read the wording very carefully, and it says something about 11 sites, but it says you might as well call them 12. And I find that a very interesting statement, because it's 11. Why would you say we might as well call it 12? And 12 is a significant number associated with Göbekli Tepe because of the most oldest and sophisticated of the enclosures. They have 12 stones in them. Originally they did. I mean, some of them have been removed. But enclosure D, for instance, which dates to 9,600 BC, that had 12 stones in it. Either the inner or the outer, I can't remember, I think it was the inner circle at enclosure C, that also had 12 stones. Plus there were 12 stones, T-shaped pillars at Navali Chora. And of course, in the middle of those, you get the much bigger double twin monoliths, basically. And I think there is a possibility that if they have found, let's say, 12 sites in the vicinity of Göbekli Tepe, and they've said that they're in a line, and this could be a mistranslation, because either that means that they're in a complete straight line, or a line like a ring around the outside of Göbekli Tepe. And I think there's a possibility that they could be suggesting that these 12 sites, 11 to 12 sites, could relate maybe to the placement of 12 stones actually in some of the enclosures, and that there may have been some kind of 12-fold division involved here, both at Göbekli Tepe and in the surrounding landscape. And of course, obviously, we're both involved with the Earth mysteries, and we know that people like the writer and visionary John Michel wrote extensively about the idea of the division of the land into 12 parts with a central omphalos or sacred center in the middle. Books like, what was it, the 12, what was his main books on that? Was it, I can't remember now. But I mean, obviously these go back to books like City of Revelation he did, and The Over Atlantis. But was it 12 or something? No, I can't remember. Let's not worry about that. But anyway, so this is possible. But the most enigmatic statement is that this discovery will make this seem like the Turkish pyramids or something, it says. Now, what the hell does that mean? And this makes me think that they're trying to make out that the Göbekli Tepe and the surrounding area is like some kind of starting point of everything, which we already know anyway. But it also tells me that they are seeing some kind of cosmic or cosmological schema on the ground, a sort of as above, so below thing going on, like that has been proposed in connection with the three pyramids at Giza, facing Orion or Cygnus or whatever you want them to do. And that there's some kind of, geometry, landscape geometry involved. These are the sort of thoughts that are going on in my mind, but I could be completely wrong. Okay, so let's say that, but it's good to speculate.
because that we went to when we were there, I think either in 2014 or 15, we went to one of the, I'm sure we went to one of these sites. You mentioned it the other day that we
Yeah,
went
it's
to Göbekli. Yeah. Can you describe remind me of what we saw there and which one that was?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I think that they are talking about is the discovery or the investigation of so-called occupational mounds. Now, these are huge, great mounds of earth and human debris, which, can be anything up to, a couple 100 meters each way. And there are several of these in the area of Göbekli Tepe, one of which is called Gobekli Tepe. Now, Gök in Turkish means sky. So it's the sky mound, basically. And we went there with a guide, and he really didn't want us to touch anything when we went there, so we couldn't investigate too deeply. But we were looking at stone tools there that were very clearly the age of Göbekli Tepe. So that site and many of these other occupational mounds, these huyuks or tepes as they're called, almost certainly is where the people that lived in the area and who, went up to Göbekli Tepe to do work, or priests, or, infrastructure of some kind, where they lived. And the possibility that these occupational mounds may have formed some kind of circle around Göbekli Tepe actually makes a lot of sense. And, you can almost envisage it that one particular community had to produce a T-shaped pillar, and every other community had to do one, and they would bring them together to make the next stone enclosure, something like that. I mean, it looks like similar things were going on at, let's say, Tiwanaku in Bolivia. The different stones and idols that the local people, one community would be involved in the creation of one stone, almost to rival that of the next community. They would do it bigger and better. And I think that probably similar processes have gone on in many different parts of the world. So the idea that there may have been 12 communities, centered around Göbekli Tepe does make some sense. And if that is the case, then maybe it is the foundation point of what John Michel later does talk about, the 12 tribe nation idea. That's it. 12 tribe nation. That was one of his books on this subject. The division of the land into 12. And why is it divided into 12? Because the heavens were divided into 12 parts, whether it be the 12 months of the year, the 12 to 13 lunar months, the 12 constellations through which the sun passes. And these ideas, although people would say, well, they're probably just Babylonian or early Greek, the fact is that the 12-fold division of the heavens has been found on one particular artifact that comes from the Indus Valley culture, and that dates at least to about 7,000 years ago. So that clearly means that we were dividing the heavens into 12 at a much earlier date. In fact, I talk all about this in my book, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, when I'm trying to explain why the number 12 was so important to these stone enclosures.
So some of the sites, I just want to mention a couple of these sites because my buddy Chuck from CF App 7865 YouTube channel, he does some remarkable research and he's compiled like all the sites in this whole area that he thinks could be some of these 11 sites. So I'm just going to mention a couple of these and we can discuss them. One of them is called Denisovan Tepe. They found statues there, T-shaped pillars, including this so-called statue, which is like a phallus statue. There's Sefer Tepe, which has T-shaped pillars. Halan Kemi, which is now underwater because of the dam. He thinks that dates to 11,500 years old. We have Kortik Tepe, which has got ritualistic burials and maybe 12,500 years old, but I'm not sure if stone monuments have been found there. We've got the 12,000-year-old site of Hassan Kiev. Bunkuklu Tala, which is underwater now, but that apparently are terracing on the local hills like you find in Peru, and pillars there, but they don't know if they're T-shaped because the tops have come off them. We've got Gusia Hoyak, which has T-pillars on stone bases like you find at Göbekli. And it has many of these sites have amazing pottery with zigzags and spirals and other such things on them. And this one has circular enclosures as well, the Gusia Hoyak. We have Norsen Tepe, which is a huge mound that's been excavated. And obviously there's sites further afield like that we've visited, you've been researching for years, like Sikli Hoyak, where they found this amazing bracelet. You've also got obviously Chattel Hoyak, which is obviously a bit later, very famous site. There's also Alanya Hoyak, which was near Navali Churi, and that apparently has got like similar again, these like portal like windows, and zigzag pottery, and the animal statues are very similar to what you find at Göbekli Tepe. So there's a whole bunch of sites. I mean, I've got to give credit to Chuck from CF Apps 7865. Do check out his channel and his new video, which is called 30 Göbekli Tepe area sites. He goes into this in detail. He's been like analyzing this really in detail on Google Earth and following all the local reports. So there's a lot of possibilities there. And it sounds like Navali Churi, which we've actually visited the actual location of where that was underwater, haven't we? Very close to it. And most of that now is on display in San Diego Museum. So you can actually see the pillars, see the enclosure. And so, yeah, there's a lot. It sounds like there's so much more to be discovered there. But the fact you've got all these possible sites, some of them are known, but we have to question, are they going to announce stuff that's never been seen before, brand new stuff? It's pretty compelling, isn't it?
Well, I mean, firstly, I would say that the sites that they're going to announce are not the ones that have already been, made known to the general public. Seems unlikely, particularly as you're not really going to want people to know too much about those other sites because they really don't want people visiting them, I wouldn't have thought. So I think these are new sites that they found around Göbekli Tepe. My best hunch would be that they are the occupational mounds. As I said, there are several that I know about in that area. I mean, some are to the north, some are to the south, one of which is even revered by local Yazidi peoples. That's these religious people who are not Muslim, believe in the angels and this god called Megalithomania Tours, the peacock angel. They're still in that area, and they revere one of these Hoyaks in connection with one of their saints. They go there, do rituals and whatever. So, I mean, that's what I think that's been discovered here, and somebody's worked out that they're all in a circle, something like that. That's what I would say is the most likely thing at the moment. I mean, if literally they are in a line, that could be very interesting, because that might give us some indication to do with, what part of the heavens they were focusing upon, what stars were of interest to them, which, again, obviously I've done a lot of work suggesting that Göbekli Tepe and various of the other monuments in that area, like Cheonu, which is near the administrative centre of Diyarbakir, are definitely focused on the north, basically, and would seem to have been interested in both the stars of Cygnus, but also the Milky Way, particularly the setting of the Milky Way, and that was seen by them as some kind of road or river into the sky world. And I mean, the more that comes out about the enclosure at the Göbekli Tepe, the more that seems to be backed up, to be honest, by evidence, even though I know obviously some of my colleagues want to do everything south to do with Orion and Sirius and whatever. That's up to them. But so that's my best guess at this time. But I mean, knowing that there are now up to 30 similar Göbekli Tepe type sites in the area, not all of them have got T-shaped pillars, of course, is that it's saying that there must have been a huge culture in this region, one that had established itself probably during the time of the Younger Dryas, so possibly about 10,000 to 10,500 BC in that area, and that evolved very, very quickly. Because remember, the very oldest of the structures at Göbekli Tepe, which is enclosure D, is the most sophisticated, the biggest and the most sophisticated. I mean, that's extraordinary. And yet what happens is that as time goes on, down to about 8,000 BC, the enclosures get smaller and smaller and much simpler, until eventually the last ones manufactured are no bigger than a bathroom, basically. And you have like these tiny little benches around the outside of them. I mean, it could almost be a sort of prehistoric Flintstones jacuzzi or something. I mean, and they've got these tiny little stones, these tiny little T-shaped stones in them. It was almost like they were just going through the motion towards the end, because that whatever purpose Göbekli Tepe was created for was now gone. And as many people will know, I believe that they were created as a response to the comet impact of 10,800 BC and the terrible events that devastated the world in the hundreds of years afterwards. And that's not even to mention the actual Younger Dryas mini ice age that lasted down to the very moment that Göbekli Tepe was constructed. In other words, these monuments are the response of these people to the possibility that similar catastrophes will happen again. And they were almost like access points, into the sky world, so that they could deal with the supernatural creatures that would appear in the sky in the form of what we would call comets. And the tails were always considered to be the tails of supernatural canines, dogs, or wolves, or foxes, or obviously in North America, coyotes and whatever, tricksters that could potentially destroy the world. And this is why I think Göbekli Tepe was constructed. And this is what I said in the book Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, back in 2014. And I'm happy to see that some of my colleagues have gone with this idea in more recent times and are publishing on exactly the same subject.
So with all these sites, what interests me, you mentioned this idea that this whole possible 12 tribe nation thing, this astronomical, if there's 12 sites.
Yeah.
And let's just speculate, like the idea that they're laying things out in the landscape. What interests me is that you've done your previous research from the ashes of angels and other such things. You talk about the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the preceded Nephilim and so forth. And they were like masters of astronomy, like land surveying, agriculture, all these things that are present in Göbekli Tepe and these sites. So does it become evident that these were the builders of these sites, and these ancient biblical tradition might have some truth in it?
Well, I mean, to start off with, let's go to Göbekli Tepe. Klaus Schmidt himself, in the book he wrote on the site, says in there essentially that the Anunnaki were the builders of Göbekli Tepe. I mean, he says it in more academic words, but essentially that's what he says. He calls them the Anuna, which was the original. I think that was the Akkadian, the original Akkadian term. And he said that the Anuna, their home was a place called the Duku Mound. And he associates that Duku Mound with Göbekli Tepe and the hill that it's built on. That's what he wrote. On another occasion, he said that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were the watchmen of the period. Well, this is clearly a reference to the Watchers. And the Watchers in tradition, the Watchers, of course, are found in the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, the Book of Jubilees, and various other of these early, so-called pseudepigraphal works, Jewish works. definitely are linked with the area around Göbekli Tepe. They're connected with the area of Şanlıurfa. They're connected with Iran in stories. So the chances are that they were in that area. When I say they, I mean that these stories originally developed in southeast Anatolia and then moved southwards through the Levant at the time of Abraham. So probably about 2000 BC, at the very end of the early Bronze Age, beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. And they were carrying these traditions into the Levant, into what became Syria, Palestine, and that they were passed on orally until they were eventually written down and become the Book of Enoch and Book of Giants, etc., etc. And that these stories originally related to the area of southeast Anatolia and, of course, the Near East in general around it, because obviously it doesn't all happen in southeast, Turkey. And this is what I said in the book From the Ashes of Angels. That was published in 1996. It was written in 1995. And as I was writing it, the first spades were going into the ground at Göbekli Tepe. And of course, they find these beautiful stone enclosures with T-shaped pillars. I had no knowledge of that when I wrote that book and talked about that very culture, the pre-pottery Neolithic culture, being the founders of civilization, in the cradle of civilization, and that this was the original Garden of Eden as written about in Judaic tradition. So for me, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe was the smoking gun of that theory, basically. So the Anunnaki, the Watchers, their offspring, the Nephilim, and the Iranian version of them, who are the Immortals, all of those, I think, are a memory of the pre-pottery Neolithic culture that founded Göbekli Tepe and all these other similar sites in the region. And the reason why they're said to have given us the rudiments of civilization, everything from agriculture to astronomy to metrology to metalwork and the rest of it, is because they were incredibly advanced and they did have this knowledge, which they either invented on the spot or some of it almost certainly was being brought into this region by the ancestors of the pre-pottery Neolithic people, which I believe were in the north, the area of the Russian steppe, beyond the Caucasus mountains that divide, or that fall between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And even Klaus Schmidt himself said that if you want to look for the ancestors of the Göbekli Tepe people, look north of the Black Sea, because he knew that a lot of the stone tools that were being found at Göbekli Tepe were almost identical to those from the very late Paleolithic in areas like what is today the Crimea, basically. And that particular culture, who produced those stones on the north side of the Black Sea, were the Swiderians, or the Epigravatians is another name for them. And they themselves are descended from the Gravatian peoples, who were at places like Songir in Russia, some other similar sites going back to about 30,000 years ago. And these were incredibly advanced peoples, the Gravatians. I mean, just look them up, some of the pictures of reconstruction, some of the finds to do with them. And I think that they were influenced by these Denisovan human hybrids coming westwards into Russia at an even earlier date, possibly 30 to 40,000 years ago. So, there's a bigger picture involved in here. And I think that Göbekli Tepe can therefore be seen almost like as the end product of these much earlier cultures that emerged originally, I think, in places like Mongolia and Siberia as early as 40 to 45,000 years ago.
Okay, so that is quite a lot we've got through, actually, isn't it? I mean, from the Dragon Man skull through the Kesem Cave to Göbekli Tepe and beyond, there's a huge amount going on right now. I mean, I'm just stunned how much is constantly being discovered in our current era. You know, a lot of people just believed everything was, had been discovered, it had been worked out, all the dating had been done. Suddenly, everything is being pushed back. New types of humans, the whole theory of evolution is being challenged. The whole megalithic building of sites all around the world is being challenged. Dates pushed back, even around Stonehenge area and everywhere else. So it's all happening, isn't it? So, Andrew, so just to tell us a bit about your latest book, Denisovan Origins, and your new book that you got coming out, I believe, next year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, in theory, it should be out later on this year. Actually, the new book. It's called Origins of the Gods. As I said, written with Greg Little, who handles most of the stuff to do with the Americas because that's where he lives. And mine has a lot on the Kesem Cave. I mean, I've worked very closely with some of the archaeologists at the site, and expands out because the thing is that one of the questions that comes up is there a relationship between all these inventions that were going on there and the birth of shamanism? And I think the answer is yes. And I try to spend quite a lot of time showing not only, how we invent things through altered states of consciousness, but also I try to show that we are almost certainly dealing with non-human intelligences and that they could be potentially they could be multidimensional in nature. I mean, I've tried to keep it as real as possible. I know that you can go far too far down the rabbit hole on a lot of this stuff. But Greg and I have tried to keep this real, basically. I mean, it bigs up people like John Keel a lot. But I mean, one person, obviously, I also have to thank already is Eric von Daniken. He's actually written the foreword to the book. I mean, he was very happy to be involved in the project. And in many ways, what we're trying to do in this book is to show that the idea of, ancient contact, ancient aliens is real, but it's just slightly different to how it's been perceived in the obvious nuts and bolts, spaceship, rocket ships manner, that there's something in it, but it's a lot more subtle, and it relates to human consciousness interaction with sites and places, and how those sites have very specific geologies that crop up again and again and again, and they seem to produce strange phenomena of various sorts, and that ancient peoples were aware of this. I mean, I deliberately sought out these sites to interact with the phenomena connected with them. I mean, this was going on, I'm sure, at Stonehenge, Avebury, up, in Yorkshire around Bempton and Rudston, on the Orkney Islands as well. That all of these sites and all these places have a relationship to the geology of the area and the phenomena. I mean, clearly I have to, give a big up, obviously, to Paul Devereux and all his work as well in this, because, he was one of the pioneers of this subject and obviously continues to be to this day. So anyway, this book's called Origins of Gods, out later on in the year. And that's about it. I mean, quite clearly my head's full of all this dragon skull stuff at the moment. And obviously Origins is coming up in November, and I will do a full lecture on most of what you've heard here today, certainly to do with the Denisovans, the Kesem Cave, and Nesha Ramla and all that sort of side of it, and how the whole thing fits together. Because the big takeaway, I think, is that there's a relationship between what was going on at the Kesem Cave and the Siberian Denisovans, and that the Dragon Man skull is one of these end products of all of this, and that he may well have had culture. He may well have had sophisticated technology, which may well come up in this area of China. So it's exciting times, and I also expect some more big discoveries to be revealed to do with the Denisovans soon. I mean, there's been talk of further skull pieces being found in the Denisova cave itself. This was teased at the beginning of this year by Bence Viola, who is one of the paleoanthropologists that's been very closely working with the archaeologists on site at the Denisova cave. So, you know, that could be announced very soon as well.
Okay, there's a lot to look forward to in archaeological discoveries. That's pretty amazing, really, isn't it? Just, I mean, I'm just blown away that the fact that this Dragon Man skull may be, you know, it's like possibly a Denisovan skull. I mean, that's what we've all been waiting for, really. We've been waiting for something like this to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, various of these paleoanthropologists have been saying, look, you know, I think we are looking at the face of a Denisovan for the first time. And to do so, I mean, just look at that skull, look at its front, look at it from the side. I mean, it is extraordinary, the shape of it. And, you know, we could go on for another hour talking about elongated skulls, basically, because, you know, I believe that one of the reasons why we started to elongate skulls artificially is to mimic the ancestors, that the ancestors actually had elongated skulls. You know, so here is the possibility of one of those great ancestors who we were mimicking with the artificial binding and creation of these elongated skulls.
It's all happening. It's all happening. Well, thanks, Andrew. I think we'll tie it up here. But look, everyone, check out Andrew's website, andrewcollins.com. And like we said, we're going to be back doing a big online conference, 7th and 8th of November 2021. And Andrew's have you got a few other things coming up? Do you want to just mention what they are?
Very few, to be honest. But I mean, next year, February, with Ancient Origins, got planned an Egypt tour, mostly focusing in on discovery of Egypt's first female pharaoh, Sobek Nofru. Then in May, we've got a Turkish tour. And obviously, you know, we realise that continental travel is still difficult for people at the moment. So, but you know, they are on the schedule, and you know, we've got interest, and you know, providing that we can do these tours, we will do. But beyond that, in theory, I'm supposed to be at New Living Expo in October in San Mateo in California. Although that's unconfirmed. That's, you know, again, it's all about the situation in the world. So that's it, really. So obviously Origins, I look forward to presenting there, and more news on that. So.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate your time and all your immense research. And yeah, reminder for people to check out andrewcollins.com. And thanks for listening, everybody. You can keep up to date with what Megalithomania is up to at megalithomania.co.uk and our YouTube channel, Megalithomania UK. And yeah, you should check out Andrew's new videos as well. He's gone into some detail about this Dragon Man skull, and he's got a few other very interesting short films up on his YouTube channel. So thanks for listening, Megalithomaniacs, and we'll see you next time.